The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone, this is Ron Hudson, a part of the True Influence team, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us today for our continued series of B2B marketing thought leader webinars. As you know, today's webinar topic is maximizing lead flow from events featuring Ruth P. Stevens. However, before we get started, I want to cover a few procedural tips for today's event. Given that we have quite a bit of content to get through and a large, fairly significant number of people here, and all of your lines are muted, so we are unable to hear you. However, we want you to submit your questions throughout the webinar, and we will get to your questions during the Q&A section. You can submit your questions utilizing the GoToWebinar Q&A function that you see on the right side of your screen. So feel free to submit your questions at any point during the presentation. And again, those questions will be answered during the Q&A segment. So now I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker today. As you know, it is Ruth P. Stevens, and she is the author of the widely acclaimed book, Trade Show and Event Marketing. She's also teaching marketing to graduate students at Columbia and a variety of business schools around the world. Her latest book is Maximizing Lead Generation, the Complete Guide for B2B Marketers. And now I'll turn it over to you, Ruth.
Thank you, Ron. Glad to be here talking about my favorite subject, making sure that your event marketing is all about leads and turning that event dollar into something really productive and revenue driving. And where I'm planning to go today in terms of coverage is 5 particular points that have a lot of leverage for event marketing in the area of lead generation. So let me dive into these in turn. But before I dive into the 5 areas of leverage, I want to discuss a little bit about the strengths and weaknesses and best applications of trade shows and corporate events. The reason being that there's nothing more expensive than a badly applied marketing communications tool, and trade shows and proprietary corporate events tend to be very expensive on a cost per contact basis, so they need to be applied to their strengths, and they're really not good at doing everything. So trade shows, for example, I'm not going to go through all of these strengths and weaknesses, but trade shows are really good for prospecting and current customer marketing, but they need to be applied to their best use, meaning there are some things that they're really not good for. And the same is true for corporate events, which I have a slide for that. For those here, corporate events are really good for enhancing your relationship with current customers. But the difficulty with corporate events is that you have to motivate the people to attend. In the area of trade shows, you can more or less rely on the show organizer to get the prospects there. But what I see is that a lot of B2B marketers are not necessarily applying these relatively expensive tools in the marketing toolkit to their best application. So back to the subject of trade shows, for example, it's really not a good idea to set your goal for a trade show exhibit or investing in an exhibit at a trade show as pure brand awareness, even if it's in even if you have a bunch of really hot new products to offer and it's a really targeted show. Brand awareness is a worthy goal, but on a cost per 1,000 basis, not to mention the cost per contact basis, trade shows are really not an efficient environment for pure branding. So I urge us all to make sure that we're using these events for the right purpose. Now, once we've determined how we're going to use events, then in the area of trade shows at least, the number one point of leverage is selecting the right show to be marketing at. And that's whether you're exhibiting, whether you're attending, whether you're speaking, whether you're hosting a breakfast or sponsoring a cocktail party or whatever. You want to be at the right show. And there are so many shows out there today in the U.S. and Canada and Europe and other global markets. So it's important to select the one where your customers are. And the way I recommend that you identify the best possible shows is develop a short list by talking to people in your industry and your customers, your salespeople, and others who are involved with your customers. There are a skazillion directories of trade shows and conferences that I've listed here on the right. But what we really want to be doing is very serious targeting. You only want to be at a show where there's a very strong likelihood that the person you're going to encounter is a likely prospect. And I would argue that in these economic times, you want the attendees to be 70, 80, maybe even 85% prospects and not extraneous waste. And that said, though, once you've selected the right show, then you want to make sure that you are applying the right attention and discipline to organizing your marketing there. So I would argue that the number one point of leverage is targeting and selecting the right show. Now, in the world of trade shows, the way to find out whether the show is going to be able to produce for you in terms of the audience quality is by talking to the show management or the show organizer. And I've given you a list of questions here that you can pose to show management. And really, if they want you to be spending money on an exhibit or a sponsorship, it's their job to explain to you who's going to be on the show floor, who's going to be the person you're likely to encounter. And what you want to go for is quality of the audience. And so the number one issue is quality. And once you've determined the quality, then you want to know about the quantity. Are they going to be there in sufficient quantity that it's worth your time and investment? And therefore, the best way to boil that down is to calculate the cost per qualified attendee through simple math. So following these steps will ensure that you're going to be at the right show. Then we come to the second point of leverage, which is setting objectives. Now, when I was researching my book called Trade Show and Event Marketing, I was astonished to find that as many as 71% of exhibitors do not set specific objectives. I was horrified. And I recommend to you that you want to select one, maybe two objectives and stick to them. And that those objectives are going to be how you're going to determine your success and how you structure the entire strategy of what you do at the show. Put them in writing and make sure that every executional element is designed to fulfill those objectives. Now, you may be saying to yourself, gosh, what should be my objective? Well, here's a list of some of the excellent objectives that I've seen over the years that B2B marketers have used. As I said, building awareness is not necessarily the best objective for a trade show or even a proprietary corporate event, but it may be in your special situation. If you are looking for ideas about what objectives certain categories use, well, I have here a list from the Center of Exhibition Industry Research. In the manufacturing sector, here are the top objectives that manufacturers say drives their attendance at trade shows. And no surprise, the top two objectives are around sales leads. This is what businesses need. They need new customers, they need prospects to raise their hands, and they need to be able to enable sales by providing them with leads. So that's my second point, the first being select the right show, and the second being set measurable objectives. Now let's move on to the third element of leverage, and this is one about the iceberg. It's amazing to me how few marketers consider event marketing, trade show marketing, in its broader strategic marketing context. The event itself is really just the frosting, it certainly absorbs a great deal of time and planning, and I'm not trying to belittle it, but we have to see it within the context of a much larger marketing campaign. The campaign involves pre-show strategies and post-show strategies. And without those three elements, you're going to underperform. So I recommend that you keep in mind that the event itself is really just the highly focused but only part of what you really need to deliver on. So let's move to an area of enormous leverage for business marketers, and this is pre-show promotions. I'm very unhappy with how few marketers understand the value of motivating your customers and prospects to meet you at the show. If you rely on the show organizer for 100% of your prospecting opportunity, you're really going to be missing out. When you think about it, if a show is a day, 2 days, 3 days, this is a really constrained resource. And it's important that every minute of your time at the show, and that means the time of all of your representatives, is used to its maximum effect. So the important thing here is that you are focusing on driving as much traffic, setting appointments in advance, and making sure that every minute of your salespeople's time, your booth reps' time, is used to its greatest extent. I ran across some data also from the exhibition industry research company or organization that suggests that there's enormous opportunity for improving the quality of your booth visitors and the conversion rate of visitors to qualified leads if you conduct pre-show promotions. So when you are planning your pre-show promotions, assuming that I've persuaded you that this is a good idea, there are two ways that you can go about it. And one is by borrowing the list of the pre-registered attendees from the show organizer. And if you are paying to exhibit or sponsor, it's very likely that the show organizer will provide you with that file. So I suggest that you send them an email or a letter and invite them to come by your booth. And better yet, to make an appointment to see a salesperson or a representative. And it's also a good idea to cull that list down and search for the target companies and titles that are most relevant to you. Then secondly, it's important to keep in mind your current customers. These are the people already on your house file. They may be current, they may be lapsed, they may have just been inquirers, but you already have a relationship with these people, and for all you know, they're going to be on the show floor, so why not continue to deepen that relationship by a meeting at the event? So if you're looking for more ideas about how to motivate people to meet with you, here's a checklist of some of the techniques that have worked for quite a while. I'm not going to go through each of these in detail. You can have a look, but there's an awful lot of opportunity. These are some of the most effective. But your objective is to make the time of your representatives as leveraged as possible, as productive as possible. So you might send an outbound communication, as listed in the right-hand column here. You might add a notice to all of your marketing communications, like with a sticker or some kind of drop-in that you're going to be at the show. You might even build a mini site inviting people to interact with you before the show. So there's a lot that can be done, and all of this is with the objective of making sure that the time at the show is as productive and highly leveraged as possible. So let's move on to the fourth element. This is about lead capture or data capture. And it's my view that when you're spending upwards of several $100s per person to have a conversation with a prospect at a show, you want to make sure that you are capturing data about customers and prospects at every opportunity. If you just have a conversation with a prospect and don't have a way to follow up, then you're really missing out on the fifth element of leverage, which I'm going to get to in a minute, which is about following up on show contacts. So it's essential that you design the at-booth or at-event experience to include the opportunity to capture data from the prospect, whether you've had a conversation with a person or not. I do not recommend that you use a fishbowl. This is why I have this little fishbowl in the lower right. The problem with inviting people to drop their business cards in a fishbowl is that you can actually rent a list much more cheaply than you can by going to a show and asking people to drop in their cards. The reason that you're at a show is to kick off a business relationship with a face-to-face conversation. That's why we're spending this kind of money on a cost-per-contact basis. So using the opportunity to kick off a relationship in a face-to-face way is the typical objective or strategic approach of trade show and event marketing. That said, though, you don't want to miss the opportunity to continue that conversation. So once you've had an interaction, you have to figure out a way to capture information. So that can either be a badge scan, or it can be gathering a business card and attaching it to a paper-based lead form. The elements that you decide to capture, I've listed several of them here, are up to you. But again, I say go for quality versus quantity, and those two come in an inverse relationship, meaning the more data you ask for, the higher the quality of the interaction, but the lower the quantity. So that's a strategic question that you have to ask yourself. But a typical B2B relationship requires the kind of data elements that I list on this on this slide. But let me tell you a story about what not to do when it comes to data capture. I happened to attend a trade show for trade show marketers in Las Vegas. Believe it or not, there is a trade show on trade shows. And one of the exhibitors, who was a vendor of services to trade show marketers, invited a formerly famous television magician named The Amazing Kreskin to appear at the booth. And I was interested in this because when I was a little girl, The Amazing Kreskin was, you know, sort of a household name in those days, and I was wondering, what's he doing now? Is he still alive? And I was impressed that the booth, the exhibitors had actually put flyers all around the show to advertise the fact that the Amazing Kreskin was going to be at their booth at a certain hour on a certain day. So, like many others, I showed up to see him. And he, in fact, gave a very, very good presentation. He was funny, engaging, and he worked the benefits of the exhibitor's services into his little magic tricks, and people were enthralled. They were so enthralled that even the booth workers were standing around, hanging on Kreskin's every word. And when Kreskin finished up and people applauded, all of the people in the aisles and in the booth watching the Kreskin show drifted away. And I noticed that no one had bothered to capture their information and get a relationship going. There were no conversations, there was no data capture, no request for badge scans or picking up of business cards. And I thought, gee, what have we done here? Why have they not recognized that they're at the show to start and sustain a business relationship? So I hope you will learn from this story, as I did. So moving on to my last point, it's all about the follow-up. And assuming you've captured the right information in some kind of generous quantity, then it's time to turn those inquiries into qualified leads. And this is a fairly scientific process, figuring out the qualification criteria that you agree upon with your sales team, and make sure that the ongoing communications to qualify those inquirers, because that's all they are, they're not leads yet, are undertaken and moving that relationship along until the prospect is ready to really take up the time of a salesperson. Essentially, we're talking about a lead management process, and my argument is that if you don't have a solid lead management process in place, then you probably don't want to be exhibiting at a trade show or running a proprietary corporate event in the first place. So that, and the reason is that it's the follow-up where the magic happens, where the qualified leads are generated, where a salesperson can actually have an opportunity to really close a piece of business, and that's where the revenue comes and all of the investment that we've made in trade show and event marketing has its final payoff. So with those 5 points of leverage, I hope you've picked up some ideas about how to gain the maximum amount of lead flow from your event marketing. And to help you, I'd like to refer you to my more recent book, Maximizing Lead Generation, which is really only out a couple of weeks, and my earlier book on trade show and event marketing, which I enjoyed very much researching and writing a few years ago, and hope they'll be useful resources for you in converting your events into an ongoing steady stream of leads that your salespeople can get out there and close and turn into revenue. So with that, I'm going to hand the mic back to Ron, and we'd be happy to address any questions that may have come up.
Terrific. Thanks, Ruth. And let's go to the questions. I'm going to scroll up here. We have a few questions.
Good.
Let's see. This is from Gary. He wrote, I have found that pre-show registration lists are going direct mail only due to complaints about spam and unwanted emails. My boss doesn't believe in direct mail pre-show campaigns. He thinks they are too costly. Do you feel direct mail pre-show marketing is worthwhile?
Ron, would you mind reading that again, please?
I'll just read that. It's really a comment and a question. I'll just read the question. Do you feel direct mail pre-show marketing is still worthwhile?
So is he asking about direct mail versus email?
Yes.
Particularly? Yeah. Well, it really depends. the problem with email for completely cold contacting of prospects is that if you don't have the inklings of a relationship, the email is going to be perceived as spam and deleted. So that is why dear old direct mail still tends to provide a lower cost per inquiry for completely cold contacting. There are a couple of other reasons as well, but generally it's the spam problem that has killed email for completely cold contact prospecting. That said, though, if the email is sort of sponsored by the show organizer, and therefore it's being received as something, a message from someone they already have a relationship with, then the prospect is less likely to press the delete key. So email can, in that context, be pretty effective as a pre-show contact medium. However, the only answer really is to test it. And direct mail has performed again and again, even with 10 years of emails availability, because it is still a relatively welcome medium and the spam problem is not in our way. So even though you're, oh, and the other thing about direct mail is that it tends to get attention in an uncluttered inbox these days, because as many B2B marketing communications have moved to email, all of our inboxes are thinner. So a direct mail piece can actually stand out and break through the clutter. So they're both good. I'm glad you asked the question, because it sounds like you already understand the power of pre-show promotions and the importance of making sure that you do your part in leveraging the time of your show attendees and your representatives.
Good question, Gary. Thank you. Next question is from Maureen. She asks, what are your recommended lead capture tools?
Yeah, well, there's so many today, it's really hard to make a specific recommendation. The electronic badge reader is still really good. It's been around for many years now, and there are some new ones that allow you to carry the same tool from show to show and not worry about renting one from the show organizer, so that's a good thing. But a lot of companies are still using paper-based tools and attaching a business card to, using a stapler or Scotch tape, because often you want to be asking additional qualification questions beyond what you get on the business card or the badge scanner. And you also want to record the items that were discussed during the initial conversation at the booth. And that's awfully hard to do electronically unless you happen to be standing in front of a keyboard. So depending on the nature of the data that you want to capture, a quickie badge scan can be more effective in a high volume environment, and a paper-based pad or notebook that allows you to staple a business card may be more effective in a lower volume, higher quality conversational environment.
Thank you for that question, Maureen. Next question is from Bill. His question is, how worthwhile might it be if I go to trade shows as a breakout presenter?
As a what presenter?
Breakout presenter.
Oh, yeah, as a speaker.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's great, and here's why. The great thing, and show organizers don't really want you to be thinking this way, but if you can work the show without buying a booth, you can do a lot of really effective trade show marketing on the very cheap. some of my favorite tools are getting a speaking engagement, because then you go to the show for free. You still have to pay typically your travel and hospitality, but you don't have to pay for an attendance or a booth. And depending on how energetic you are, you can actually make a lot of business contacts at a show by just walking around and being friendly.
Mm-hmm.
Another great way to gain access to a show at a very low cost is to simply buy an exhibit hall badge and walk around the exhibit hall making contacts in a similar method. Another technique is to host a breakfast associated with the show in the same city. The problem there is that you have to be sure you have the access to the attendees to populate the breakfast with the target audience that you're looking for. But the advantage is that a breakfast event is relatively low cost and people are still quite wide awake compared to evening events where they might be sleepy or filled with booze and not as attentive to your message. So there are a number of techniques for taking advantage of the fact that hundreds, maybe thousands of your prospects are flying into a certain city at their expense and staying under the same roof with you for several days at a time. It's a wonderful thing when a show organizer has made a market for you and should be taken advantage of.
Great. We have time probably for a couple more questions before we move. Take more questions. Just want to let everyone know that you will be receiving a free chapter from Ruth's new book, Maximizing Lead Generation. That's actually the first chapter of the book. We will send that to you in an email. And I've had a couple of questions about access to this presentation. The presentation is being recorded, so we will be uploading it to the site, trueinfluence.com. I did post the full link in the chat, but you'll be able to gain access to it within the next 24 to 48 hours. Now, moving on to this next question, and before I do that, thank you, Bill, for your question. The next question is from David. David has a comment, and let me get down to his question. Just to be respectful of Ruth's time, I'm just going to ask your question, David. Hope you understand. His question is, I'm guessing he's actually asking, do you have good examples available for drawing premiums that work?
For drawing what?
Sure. David, will you rewrite? I'm not sure I'm posing the question the way you want it. So I'm not sure if I pose that the way it's written. I'm not sure if that's the way he actually means for it. So let me read what he wrote here beforehand to see if I can better understand. It says, thanks for exposing fish bowls. The other cringe factor for me is when I see a drawing and the prize is of such general interest that there's no more self-qualification than the fish bowl.
Here. No, I'm glad we're on the same page on this.
Mm-hmm.
The expense per contact at trade shows is unparalleled in the B2B marketing toolkit, and there's really no point in not gaining the leverage that's available and just treating it like another Marcom event. Or another Marcom contact. It is not another Marcom contact. It's actually a very efficient sales contact in the early stages. So I'm afraid that there's a lot of waste in business marketing today. And the reason I actually decided to research and write a book about this area is that I learned that anywhere from 18 to 40% of B2B marketing budgets are spent on event marketing. I even met a company that spends 60% of their marketing budget on events. And the amount of crazy behavior, like fish bowls, that you see out there is just astonishing.
Um, okay, thanks for your question, David. He did rewrite the question that
Oh, good.
posed earlier. So he's basically asking, have you seen examples of prizes, premiums that help to self-qualify ideal leads?
Yes, yes. Rather than the prize or premium itself, what I would talk to is the process. And here's my view on this. Premiums and tchotchkes can really be important and helpful in a trade show and event environment. But we have to consider what we're trying to do with them. What is the purpose? And if the show floor is populated 85 or higher % by people who might actually buy from us, then I say go ahead and put your charming tchotchke out on the front desk of your booth as an attraction device to get all of those potentially qualifiable prospects to come by. Use that as bait, and that really makes a lot of sense. On the other hand, if the penetration of qualified prospects is much lower, then I would use the premium or tchotchke as a thank you gift after the conversation has already been had, and I would design my booth and my signage to both attract the qualified and repel the unqualified as they walk by the booth. And that's by using booth design and signage that helps the passers-by self-identify, providing them with qualifiers like, we have the best software for small business accountants, or something like that. So that if you're not an accountant, you're not going to stop by. So a signage like that, although I don't recommend that particular wording, but you get my point, that the wording is attracting accountants and repelling non-accountants. And that's a great way to reduce the amount of waste in the number of conversations that you're likely to have. And similarly, using the tchotchkes or premium giveaways in the context that they will be most effective.
Great. Thanks for that question, David. Appreciate you retyping that in. And we're going to take one last question from Bill. He's asking, would your new book be helpful to me as a one-person company with a big training product, or do I need a big budget?
Yeah, frankly, the book is really designed for companies that have a sales force and where the marketing department is on the hook to generate leads on behalf of sales productivity. So it really, I would say, it is more applicable in the context of a medium to large enterprise. Or, I mean, medium can be, 5, 20 people. But I wouldn't see it as an entrepreneurial guide, if that's an appropriate answer. However, my publisher would, of course, kill me for saying something like that, and I would say actually that there are nuggets in the book that I think are applicable across the board, some sensible strategies that can be used by sole practitioners as well as larger companies.
Okay, so that...
I'm sorry, Ron, what I would suggest is that this gentleman download the first chapter, which you are handing out,
Right.
and get a feel for the level of applicability to his business.
Great. All right,
And
Bill.
by the way, can I also mention the book is being sold at Amazon for less than $17, so it's pretty low risk.
Yes, absolutely. All right, so thanks, Ruth, and thank you for all who joined us. We appreciate your participation in this True Influence event and invite you to visit trueinfluence.com and leadpackonline.com at any time for a look at upcoming events. Again, thanks from all of us at True Influence. We will now conclude the webinar. Have a good day.